This is what an ancient battle sounded like. Chaos. Confusion. A wall of noise where orders were swallowed whole. A general's command could just vanish into the wind, and thousands of men fought and died in their own terrifying, isolated bubble of violence. But the Romans had a secret weapon against the chaos. And no, it wasn't a sword or a spear. It was a kind of forgotten technology. A language of sound that allowed their generals to command armies with deadly precision, even in the heart of that storm. This is the story of how Rome turned simple musical instruments into a battlefield network that helped them conquer the known world. To really get the genius of the Roman system, you first have to appreciate just how impossible their problem was. Forget what you've seen in movies, with generals on a hill shouting one command that everyone magically hears and obeys. The reality was a sensory nightmare. Picture it. You're a Roman general. The battlefield stretches for miles, choked with a fog of dust from tens of thousands of marching feet. The air is thick with sweat, blood, and fear. Your army, a legion of almost 5,000 men, is arranged in its complex three-line formation, and across from you, maybe 50,000 Celtic warriors are whipping themselves into a frenzy. It's a terrifying wall of sound war cries, weapons banging on shields, and the blare of their own primitive horns, the carnix. Their goal isn't just to psych your men out. It's to create so much noise that your legion becomes deaf, blind, and totally uncontrollable. So, how do you give an order? You can't just shout. The most powerful voice would be a whisper in that hurricane. Your front line could be hundreds of yards away, and the flanks of your army might be over a mile apart. The second a command leaves your lips, it's gone. Useless. What about messengers? Sure, you could send a runner on foot or horseback, but that's dangerously slow. By the time your order to go help the right flank gets there, that flank might have already collapsed. Even worse, your messenger is a huge target. One stray arrow or a determined enemy horseman, and your vital command dies right there with him. Your orders aren't just delayed, they might never show up at all. Visual signals, like standards and flags, were definitely a thing. The legion's great silver eagle, the Aquila, was a crucial rallying point, but they had serious limits. On a clear day with a good line of sight, they worked. But battles are messy. Smoke, dust, and rolling hills could hide a standard in a second. A centurion squinting through the haze might miss the signal to advance, or worse, get it completely wrong. This was the fundamental crisis of ancient command. A general was basically a brain without a nervous system. He could see the whole battlefield, cook up a brilliant strategy, but had no reliable way to get his orders to the thousands of soldiers acting as the legion's muscle. An army that can't get orders isn't an army. It's a mob, and a mob is destined to get cut down. And yet, the Romans solved it. They engineered a system so tough and effective, it allowed them to coordinate maneuvers on a scale their enemies could barely wrap their heads around. They built a network that was immune to the noise, the chaos, and the visual mess of the battlefield. They created a language made not of words, but of sound. So, how did they pull it off? The Roman solution wasn't just one thing, but a system, a super disciplined mix of technology, training, and military strategy. And at the heart of it all were the inatores, the military musicians of the legion. These guys weren't there for entertainment. They were vital communication specialists. Their instruments were as critical as any sword. The late Roman writer Vegetius gives us a window into this in his famous work De Re Militari, or Concerning Military Matters. He lays it out plainly. The music of the legion consists of trumpets, cornets, and boutonnets. Let's break down this lost technology. The Romans used a family of brass instruments, each with a very specific job. First, you had the tuba. Now, forget the giant looping thing you see in modern orchestras. The Roman tuba was a straight, 4-foot-long bronze tube that ended in a flared bell. It made a low, powerful, booming blast. The guy who played it, the tubasen, was in charge of the big-picture commands. According to Vegetius, the tuba sounds the charge and the retreat. Its deep tone was designed to carry across the whole battlefield, signaling the major movements for everyone. When the tuba sounded the advance, every single man knew it was time to move. It was the general's voice, made of bronze. Next up, and maybe the most important, was the cornu. This was a huge G-shaped horn, almost 10 feet long if you uncurled it, that wrapped around the musician's body. Its higher-pitched, clearer tone made it stand out from the tuba. The player, or cornisan, was attached to a specific unit and its standard. His job was to pass commands down to a more local level. Vegetius tells us that the cornets are used only to regulate the motions of the colors, meaning the standards of individual units. And here's the genius of it. It was a chain of command. The general gives an order. The legion's main tubicines might sound a general call, "Get ready to advance." Then, the cornicines attached to each standard would listen for the specific follow-up calls. One series of notes might mean, "First cohort, go," while another meant, "Fifth cohort, form a defensive square." The cornu was the link between the general's grand plan and the tactical moves of units on the ground. The cornicins stood right by the standard bearer, the signifer, and together they were the communications hub for their unit. Finally, there was the bucina. It was shaped like the cornu but smaller and was used for more day-to-day administrative signals. It sounded the changing of the guard, the morning wake-up call, and mealtimes. It also had a unique, special call known as the classicum, a signal reserved just for the commander-in-chief, sounded when the general was present, or to authorize a military execution. These three instruments created what you could call a pre-digital communications network. The tuba was the mass broadcast, the cornu was the targeted message, and the bucina handled daily operations. And the men who played them, the enitores, weren't just low-ranking grunts. They were often senior non-commissioned officers, and some sources suggest their pay could be 1.5 to 2 times that of a regular legionary, which tells you how important they were. They were professional soldiers who went through brutal training, not just in music, but in the art of war. They had to be right in the action, often without a shield, their only protection being their spot near the standard and the men around them. This wasn't just a band playing marching tunes. This was a sophisticated, layered communication system built to bring order to the most chaotic place on Earth. The real power of this system wasn't just the instruments, but the complex language they spoke. Every Roman legionary, from the freshest recruit to the toughest veteran, was drilled relentlessly to understand this language. It was a set of signals, possibly over 40 distinct calls, that were burned into their muscle memory. As Vegetius famously wrote, "What is necessary to be performed in the heat of action should constantly be practiced in the leisure of peace." For a Roman soldier, the sound of the horns was as clear and instinctive as a spoken word. Let's try to imagine what some of these signals actually sounded like and what they meant. While the exact musical notation is lost to time, we can make some pretty good guesses based on historical accounts and pure military logic. Imagine a legion ready for battle. The air is tense. The men are in their ranks, silent, waiting. Suddenly, a single, sustained blast from the tuba cuts through the air. This isn't some fancy melody, it's the unmistakable command, "Ad arma," to arms, or "move out." It tells the entire legion to get ready for a big move. The centurions echo the command, hands on their swords, eyes forward. Then comes the specific tactic. The general wants his first 2 lines to advance, but the third to stay back in reserve. A cornicin near the general sounds a specific pattern, maybe a few sharp, rising notes. This signal is then picked up and repeated by the cornicines of the cohorts in the first and second lines. It's a cascade of sound, flowing right down the chain of command. The soldiers hear the call from their unit's horn and know the order is for them. They start to march, their steps kept in a steady rhythm, not by a drum, which the Romans didn't use for complex battlefield signals, but by the cadence of the horns and the tap of the centurion's staff on his shield. This is advance. Now, the battle is on. The Roman front line crashes into the enemy. The general, watching from his spot, sees a weak point in the enemy's center. He wants a cohort to form a wedge, the cuneum, and punch right through. An order is given. A new signal plays a fast, aggressive, jabbing series of notes, completely different from the steady advance call. This is the sound for charge. The cohort centurion yells the order, the cornicin blasts the signal, and the soldiers, having practiced this 1,000 times, instantly shift into a human spearhead and surge forward. That's a level of precision a screaming mob of an army could never dream of matching. Perhaps the most famous Roman formation was the testudo, or tortoise. To defend against a storm of arrows, the men would form an armored shell with their shields. How do you coordinate something that complex in the middle of a fight? You guessed it. A unique horn call. It might have been a lower, more defensive-sounding pattern that every man in the unit knew instantly. When they heard it, soldiers would automatically close ranks, raise their shields, and lock them together into a nearly arrow-proof shelter. The signal didn't just suggest the idea. It triggered a pre-programmed collective action. And what about the most critical command of all? Retreat. There's a huge difference between an orderly, fighting withdrawal and a panicked rout. A rout meant you were done for. A retreat signal had to be crystal clear and calming. Vegetius specifically says the tuba sounds the retreat. This call would have been totally distinct, maybe a long, mournful, falling tone. It didn't mean run for your lives. It meant disengage in good order, reform, and get ready for what's next. That signal alone probably saved countless legions from being wiped out. These calls governed every part of military life. There were signals for building camp, for changing the watch, for assembly, and for dispersing. The inatories were the legion's clock, its nervous system, and its voice, all in one. The system made sure that no matter how loud the enemy screamed, no matter how thick the dust, a Roman soldier was never truly alone. He was always connected to his commander by this invisible, unbreakable web of sound. We're exploring the systems that made the Roman army such an unstoppable force. If you're enjoying this look into Rome's forgotten methods for commanding armies, this is a perfect time to support the channel. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We break down the nuts and bolts of ancient military history every week, and you won't want to miss what's next. Now, back to the battlefield. But these signals were more than just a clever command system. They were a psychological weapon. To really get the impact, you have to put yourself in the shoes of a Gallic or Germanic warrior facing the legions for the first time. Your way of war is all about passion, individual bravery, and making a terrifying amount of noise. You and your buddies scream and beat your weapons on your shields, creating a deafening racket designed to break your enemy's spirit before you even get close. You charge forward in a giant, howling wave of people, and the Romans are silent. They advance in perfect order, shields locked, faces grim. The only sound is the rhythmic tramp of their hobnailed sandals and the clinking of armor. This silence is creepy. It's unnatural. It's the silence of a predator, of a machine. It screams a level of control and confidence that is deeply unsettling. Then, the horns start. A single tuba blast echoes across the field. In response, 1,000 shields rise as one. Another call, this time from a cornu, and a whole section of the Roman line starts to move, not like a mob, but like a single, multi-legged creature. They turn left, they turn right, they form a tortoise shell to block your javelins, all in perfect sync, all triggered by those strange, alien notes. To an outsider, it must have looked like black magic. How could one man, hundreds of yards away, control thousands of others, like puppets on a string? That display of perfect, inhuman coordination was terrifying. It told you that you weren't fighting men, you were fighting something else. You were fighting a legion. This psychological punch was just as important as the tactical advantage. The Roman horns took the enemy's main weapon, chaos, and replaced it with Rome's own, terrifying absolute order. The battle wasn't a brawl anymore. It was a surgical procedure, and the Romans held the scalpels. But the effect on the Roman soldiers was just as powerful. In the middle of the screaming chaos of a melee, it's easy to feel lost, alone, and terrified. Fear is contagious. But for the Roman legionary, there was always an anchor. The familiar call of his cohort's cornu was a lifeline. It cut through the noise and panic with a clear, direct order. It was a reminder that he wasn't alone. He was part of a bigger machine. A plan was in motion, and his commanders were in control. This connection to the command structure was a huge morale boost. It replaced doubt with clarity and fear with purpose. A soldier who knows what to do is a soldier who can master his fear and fight. The horn calls reinforced the discipline drilled into them from day one. It was a constant audio feed that held the legion together under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Ultimately, this system was a battle-winning advantage. A Roman general could actively react to the fight in near real time. Enemy cavalry suddenly shows up on the left flank. A series of horn blasts could have the nearest cohorts turn and form a defensive line in minutes. A part of the enemy line starts to buckle. The horns could signal the reserves, the fresh soldiers of the third line, the triarii, to move in and deliver the final blow. This gave Roman armies a tactical flexibility that was simply unmatched. They could fake a retreat, lure an enemy into a trap, and then sound the signal to turn and crush them. They could rotate tired troops out of the front line with fresh ones from the back, making sure their army could fight longer and harder. All of these complex, battle-winning moves were made possible by one thing: the ability to communicate clearly and reliably through the language of the horns. If this system was so incredibly effective, why do we call it a lost technology? The answer is that the technology wasn't just a physical thing you could dig up. A cornu is just a piece of bronze. The real technology was the system itself, the huge body of knowledge, the complex language of signals, and most importantly, the institution needed to keep it all going, the professional Roman legion. As the Western Roman Empire started to decline in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, its centralized professional army began to fall apart. Legions were replaced by smaller, less disciplined units, often filled with non-Roman mercenaries. The tough, standardized training that Vegetius described, where every recruit learned the horn calls by heart, just faded away. The feudal armies that came after Rome were made of part-time soldiers and knights, fighting for a local lord, not a state. They had neither the need nor the ability to run a complex command system for tens of thousands of men. Warfare got smaller, more local, and a lot less sophisticated. And so, the language of the horns went silent. The knowledge of the specific calls, the intricate command relays, the very discipline needed to make it work, it all disappeared with the legions that created it. The instruments themselves survived as artifacts, but their language was dead. It wasn't that a book was burned. The entire military and social structure that gave the technology its meaning was gone. It would be over 1,000 years before European armies even began to approach the level of command and control the Roman legion had perfected. The story of Rome's battlefield horns is the story of Roman ingenuity at its finest. They took a simple piece of curved metal and turned it into the nervous system of the most effective fighting force the world had ever seen. The cornu, the tuba, and the buccina weren't just for making noise. They were instruments of order, weapons of psychology, and tools of tactical genius. They let one person's will cut through the chaos of battle, turning a mob of individuals into a single, unstoppable force. Modern military technology far surpasses the Roman horn, but the principle it perfected remains. Communication is essential to cut through the fog of war, maintain cohesion, and ensure a unified force. The lesson from these ancient horns about the power of communication still echoes today.